Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is change versus transformation. So we're going to look at the distinctions of change or incremental change, actually, versus transformation. It should be an interesting conversation. But before we begin, let's take a minute to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. And good morning to everybody else who's joining us. Today, we're talking about incremental change versus transformation. And I think there is a very popular conversation about changing the system from within the system. And I'm posing the notion that you can't get there from here. You know, like if we look at the state of the world and the systems that we have to be able to transform it, to be able to turn around climate change, to be able to turn around our systems that are broken, that are leading us into devastation, you know, our reliance upon fossil fuels and transitions that are incremental. What happens is that these transitions are defined by the system that they're trying to change, right? The change that's occurring within that system is constrained by the structure of that system of necessity, right? So incremental change in its way is really more of the same because it's defined by this existing structure, if that makes sense. Like we can say we need more equity and inclusion in this existing system, and we can move toward equity and inclusion. However, the structure of the system is still in place and is dictating what that change can look like. So it's kind of like putting a new coat of paint on something when the underlying structure itself is flawed. And a new coat of paint can make things feel fresher and make things feel more tolerable, and essentially gives us an excuse to continue with the walls as they are, until whatever the underlying rot is actually makes those walls crumble. Transformation is a nonlinear path, and what transformation makes available to us is possibilities and potentials that don't exist in the presiding system. So I'm going to use a personal growth example. So many of us have experienced trauma in our lives, and through therapy, through work, we can come to a deeper understanding of that trauma. We may become somewhat desensitized to it so that we don't get as readily triggered, so that it's not as active in our lives. But it's still operative. Like, we need to, in order to be contending with it, we have cultivated certain coping mechanisms to override it. So when a fear comes up, we might be able to have skills that allows us to talk ourselves down, for example. But and that's a change. There's change happening. Maybe we're not as reactive as we were. And what's happening is that we have acclimated in a way, we've cultivated a new behavior still based in that trauma. And that trauma is operative. Maybe we've learned to avoid the things that would trigger us in the past. So that's a change in our behavior. But that underlying stimulus is still there, versus transformation, where that underlying stimulus, that underlying reactivity actually dissolves and disappears. And then the need for all those compensatory behaviors also dissolves. It's no longer there. We don't need it anymore. The possibility of that thing dissolving has, or the fact of that thing actually dissolving, has made all those compensatory behaviors unnecessary. It's made all those compensations irrelevant, because the whole baseline, the premise, has shifted. So we are masters at adaptive behavior. We're masters at finding new ways to deal with challenging circumstances, or it's kind of like, if there's a road and the road is blocked or under construction, we find other ways to get where we need to go, going around that road. It's a detour. It's not necessarily the quickest way to get where we want to go. It's not a clear passage from here to there. We find ways around it. And that's what we do behaviorally. We do it on an emotional level behaviorally. We do it on an actual level. Any of us who have in this political atmosphere, probably many of us have people that are dear to us in our lives who hold different ideas about how things should unfold politically. We create an adaptive behavior, typically, where we just don't talk about those things. So we avoid those landmines, we navigate around them so that we don't have to contend with them. And I think that that's what we do in our personal emotional lives as well. And these behaviors, these avoidant behaviors end up limiting us, limiting our expression, limiting our abilities to connect on certain levels, constraining, creating more and more constraints within which we need to navigate, and it narrows and narrows and narrows our expression and our experience. And this conversation came out of a conversation with a client friend who is looking at the dynamics of radical change. And I'm going to say that we can't even use the word radical change. We need words. We need to use a different word, transformation, because change is bounded by the linear. And if we look at the world that we, or at least if I look at, I don't know that we share the same dream, but if I look at the world that I am envisioning to create, there's no way to get there from here. There's no way to fix all the brokenness of the systems that we currently have in a linear way from within the system, given the constraints that we exist within. There's no way. Legislation's not going to fix things. It's more of the same. For example, even an overthrow wouldn't fix things, because the likelihood is that it's just perpetuating the same thing with different leaders. I mean, if we look at oppressors and oppressed, we can see that a pattern, a very long established, historically validated pattern, is that the oppressors are overthrown by the oppressed, who then become the new oppressors. It's just a new face on an old pattern, rather than ushering in a new system. And in personal growth work, I think that we can recognize that there needs to be we understand that there's breakdown before there's breakthrough, right? We understand that things often need to fall apart before they can reassemble. So this friend was telling me an allegory about this woman in a cave who is weaving the tapestry of the world. And in the process of the weaving of the tapestry, she's also tending a cauldron that is generating all the seeds of the world. And she needs to stir the cauldron and to tend it periodically, to allow it to do its magic of generating new life. And as she's stirring the cauldron one time, there's this big black dog that comes in and into this cave, or is in the cave, and absolutely shreds the tapestry so that it cannot be recovered. It cannot be repaired. And when the woman is gazing upon this shredded tapestry, she has a vision for a new design, a new pattern, even more beautiful than the last. And she embarks on creating this new tapestry that's even like so much more beautiful than the previous one. And the punchline of the story, I guess, is that the black dog is her dog, and that its function is to periodically shred the tapestry so that it can be recreated anew into something more beautiful. And this is a story of how the incremental change on the same weave structure, for example, perpetuates that weave structure, right? It's funny that this story came up because I have literally in this past month re-engaged with weaving. I have this wonderful floor loom, and I haven't woven on it in years, and I just gave that to myself as part of this month of my time off from my coaching practice. And the way that weaving works is you thread a warp, and the warp has a certain structure to it. It has certain pattern of colors, for example, and it has a certain number of threads, and the threads are of certain material. And while you can make a huge variety of patterns depending upon how you tie up those threads and how you decide to treadle the pattern, the order in which you raise and lower the different shafts of the loom to create different patterns between the threads and the weft, which is the thread that goes through every time you lift certain threads and you keep certain threads down and you put a thread horizontally across, and that's called the weft. And then so you can change the arrangement of how these threads are raised and lowered, but you're still bound by the foundational structure of the warp, which is the lengthwise threads that you have put on the loom. And so the foundational structure, it's change versus transformation. When the whole thing is torn off the loom and you can't reconstruct the warp, the lengthwise threads that provide the foundational structure, when you need to change the foundational structure, that's when you can envision something that's entirely new. And so change, as we're discussing it, incremental change, is bound to and defined by the existing structure. And transformation is being able to create a new structure, being able to put a new warp on the loom, so to speak. And what is also being spoken of in that context is creating new potentials, creating new possibilities. Rosalind says, from the top down, not the bottom up. Yes, well said. Well said, Rosalind. So to be not trying to fix, change a system that's rotten, essentially, but to be creating a new one, creating from the future. So even beyond, from top down to bottom up, from the future instead of from the past. When we're fixing things, incremental change is defined by the past, if that makes sense, because the structure's emerging from the past. Whereas transformation is coming from a different place, is coming from the future. Where it's the difference between being emerging from the past versus being called into the future, or being defined by the past versus being called into the future. It's the difference between fixing and creating, because fixing is defined by a problem that already exists, that's mired in the past, that's defined by the past. So I see this distinction in the core connection work, which is nonlinear. So it's always been a challenge to try and describe this work. So as a result, I'm interviewing folks that are clients that are experiencing the work for their descriptions of it. And what we do in that work is we access this other than conscious intelligence, this world of symbol and sensation that transcends the rational mind to access potentials that were previously, or that are linearly inaccessible, to be able to jump out of the matrix, so to speak, and thereby access potentials that don't exist on a linear scale, that actually then let us dissolve whatever that issue is that we've been spending so much time and energy navigating around. You know, all these detours that we've created to avoid the limitation of whatever that detour was caused by, whatever trauma, you know, all our compensatory behaviors. We actually dissolve whatever that obstruction was somehow, non-linearly, which then opens up all these possibilities for unimpeded travel, using the detour metaphor there. So the question is, you know, it's so interesting in hearing people talk about this work. It's been a gift to me because it's such a wonderful, rich affirmation and confirmation in a way. But so many of them have said, you have to suspend your disbelief because it just doesn't make any sense. And so when we talk about transformation versus change being linear, it's making sense. We're trying to make sense of things, right? But this process, the core connection process, accesses dimensions of ourselves that make no sense in there's not a linear correlation between the experience that's the transformative experience that's allowing our brain to make new associations that defy our explanation. There's no correlation between that and why it should matter, why it should make the change, why that new imaginal connection should make this experiential transformation. And I think that this is an important thing, like that phenomena, if we can somehow wrap our brains around that kind of phenomena, there's a possibility for a new model of change, or sorry, a model of transformation that might actually give us access to these new dimensions of experience. So I invite you to play with that, to look at nonlinear transformation. And what it means is engaging different elements of our consciousness and of our awareness in terms of being able to develop these new potentials. It means going beyond our linear, logical, rational bias to explore something else that can catapult us from one place to another without having to travel the road in between. It reminds me of the book or the story of A Wrinkle in Time, the Tesseract, where we've believed that the quickest transition from one point to another is a straight line, but the Tesseract is actually bringing those points together. And I think that that's such a great representation of transformation versus change. And the points actually are not the same. Like there is no path from here to there other than the Tesseract. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to spend this time together, musing on what it is to be human. And I'm so grateful to you for the opportunity. So until next time.